Hi, in this video recording we're going to discuss mesh configuration options of iOS XE release 17.1 of the Cisco Catalyst 9800 series wireless controller. Please note in this video we are not going to go through detailed steps and explanation of every single parameter in mesh configurations. The purpose of this recording is mainly to guide you through what screen, what menus, and what configuration steps you should take in configuring mesh network in general. For specific details in mesh deployment and mesh configuration and explanation of all mesh configuration parameters, please refer to this mesh deployment guide where the link is indicated at the bottom of this screen. So as you know, Catalyst 9800 have a different configuration settings and when it comes to configuring controller with APs, and it's very different from the previous known configuration options on our AROS wireless controller. With iOS XE operating system on the Catalyst 9800, we going to this new configuration parameters when we deal with WLAN profiles, policy profiles, and then policy tags as shown on the left side of this graphics. Then we have to configure AP joint profiles and with the side tags and RF tag profiles for specifically 2.4 or 5 gigahertz radius. Then once all these profiles and policies are configured, they apply specifically access point that we want them to join the controller with specifically configured mesh profiles. Again, in our case, these access points will be indoor or outdoor access point. So these are the steps that we're going to go through configuring mesh networks on the Catalyst controller. First, we're going to discuss the AAA provisioning of mesh access point. Again, it can be done by AAA provisioning or by using just MAC addresses or even PSK. Then we're going to create mesh profile settings inside policy profiles. After that, we're going to talk about AP joint configuration and policy tag setup. After that, we're going to discuss the WLAN profile configuration, side tag configuration, where do we want to apply specific policies in profiles created in earlier steps, and then eventually specific mesh AP configuration and mapping all the configured policies and profiles created in these steps 1 through 8 to the mesh APs. Either they're indoor or outdoor APs. And finally, we'll talk quickly about mesh monitoring options. Okay, so the first step would be actually provision or deal with authentication and authorization of a mesh access point to the wireless controller. So again, there are several steps in provisioning of mesh access point. It can be done via AAA server, or it can be simply by setting up the wrap and map MAC addresses of the indoor or outdoor mesh access point. So as you can see in this screenshot, we adding a bunch of MAC addresses to the wireless controller. These MAC addresses are of the mesh APs that will be provisioned on this controller. You can also add them in the form of serial numbers. Or you can also add them if you have many mesh APs that you want to add. You can create a CSV file and add them this way. After you've done that, we have to create authorization for those mesh AP to join the controller. So under AAA, we are going to now authorization tab, and here we create a method name. So in our example, we create, for example, TAB mesh as a method, and here you can choose if it's going to be local or it can be a central authentication. So as you can see, you can configure different options. How do you want to provision those mesh APs on the wireless controllers? Again, these configuration options are optional. You can go with AAA, or you can go simply by just using MAC addresses or just using PSK keys to provision mesh APs, and we'll talk about all of that. So in this screenshot, for example, we'll talk about AP policies, provisioning policies. As you can see under this AAA tab, when we go to AP policy tab, we set up authorization of the APs against MAC addresses. So we enable that provisioning on this screen. And also the authorization method, as we created in the previous tab, we define as TME mesh. Now, in the next step would be also to set up a global advanced configuration tab. And you can see here we can set up the authorization methods, authentication methods, and how we want to use the local authorization or central authorization. So again, all these options are still optionals, but they require if you decide to go with the AAA authentication and provisioning of the bash access point. In the next step, once we define all this provisioning and authorization and authentication of access point, and we know which method we want to use, we go specifically to the wireless mesh configuration tab and configure some of the essential mesh configuration parameters. For example, in the general config tab, we configure a PSK key. Here we can configure our specific key or use just the default Cisco key. So if nothing is configured, the mesh APs by default will connect to the network just using a default PSK. So again, these are the tabs or check marks that we have to use to configure how we want to connect those APs to the network. And some other essential parameters that we have to configure for the mesh network. For example, in a general, the BBTU, if you want to set up backhaul with the UDP domain, and other different parameters as shown on this screen. After we configure the general parameters under wireless mesh configuration, there is another tab that we go to. It's Profile tab, where we configure again the general profile information, such as we create a new profile name for the mesh network, give it description. We set up very important parameters such as range, maximum range allowable between the root AP and mesh APs, and other really important parameters. Again, we're not going to go into every parameter details, but you can read about them in a mesh deployment guide. So after we create this general settings in mesh profile, we go to Advanced tab, and under Advanced tab, you actually set up the security method. As you can see, we choose here PSK mode as we configured it previously with authentication and authorization methods as we defined before. On the same screen, we configure the backhaul. We can choose 5 gigahertz or 2.4 gigahertz backhaul. We set up Ethernet bridging if required, and bridge group. Now, this is really important parameter here. If you set up a controller with multiple branches, mesh branches, wrapped map branches with multiple childs, and you want them to work independently, you can set up groups so that they don't mesh between themselves, meaning each branch would work autonomously. The next setting we're going to go into is actually policy profile setting. So in this screen, as you can see, we go to the tags and profiles menu, and start creating under policy profile a mesh policy profile. Now we can create here a mesh policy profile with all these settings, name, description, etc. Or actually we could use a default policy profile and just use it in a mesh configuration. So this is kind of a optional step as well. In the next step, step 8 and 9, we actually need to configure the AP join profiles. So far we created the policy profiles, the mesh profiles, and now as indicated in the beginning, we have to set up actually AP join profile. So we can do it actually by going to tag and profiles and choose the AP join profile tab and create a new name. In our case, we create AP join profile called mesh AP profile. Give it description, etc. Then if we go to this AP tag, as you can see here in the AP tab, we can specifically map the profiles, that mesh profiles that we created before. So we map here TME mesh MA profile that was created in the previous step, and other parameters if desired. So this is the AP join profile that we create for the mesh APs. Next, we have to set up actually the policy tag, where we gonna map the previously configured the policy profile and WLAN profile. And so this tag we create under tagging profiles policy tag. We call it mesh lab tag, just as an example. And if already WLAN existed, we can just simply choose the WLAN from this pull-down menu and also choose the policy profile that we created. So this tag will actually map the policy profile to WLAN. Now this step is optional. If this WLAN profile was not created yet, we can do the same mapping in under WLAN configuration. This is a step that we're doing in case WLAN was not created. So again, we go under tags and profiles, edit WLAN, and we create in our case here a new WLAN called TME mesh. We give it a name, and that's going to be the name of our SSID. As you can see, if we go to this add to policy tab, under this tab, when we choose this newly created WLAN, we can add the policy tag and the policy profiles to this WLAN. And when we save that, it basically accomplishes the same thing as what we did in step 8 and 9. Next one, in configuration, the next step would be actually setting up a site tag. So we're setting up a site tag from this tag and profiles menu, and we create a new site tag. We call it mesh lab. So basically we kind of will define a site tag where we want to have all these mesh APs be located, kind of like a specific location of the mesh APs per specific location. So we call this site tag in our case mesh lab, and we give it some description, and we also indicate the AP join profile in this site tag. Also, if you see in this next profiles, when we go to static configuration, we can choose specifically what APs we want to define these profiles with, or set these profiles with. We pick this MAC addresses of mesh APs that we want to map with, and once you click them, you will get these additional pop-up screen comes up, and you can associate these different policies and site tags, RF tags, with these APs is defined in marked in this list of MAC addresses. Okay, so in the previous step, we configured all these mesh profiles and policy profiles and AP join profiles. Now we actually have to configure APs. So now that we see here, as you can see, all these APs that joined our controllers. Okay, we see that admin status, they're all active. We can go to access point and specifically look at these two tabs, General tab and Mesh tab. So if we start with the General tab, first of all, we have to reconfigure our access point to be in bridge mode, meaning it can be a wrap or a map. Okay, and that's a really important step to establishing that that access point is going to be a mesh access point. And at the same time, we can apply the policy tag that we created in a previous step in this general configuration. Once we define that that access point is a bridge access point, we go to the mesh tab, and is shown in this screen capture. Under mesh tab, we have to specifically choose if it's what's the role of that mesh AP, if it's a root AP or wrap, or if it's just a mesh AP or a map. Also in that screen, as you can see, there are other very important parameters that need to be configured. For example, if you're configuring daisy chain, the check mark should be marked. If you want to block child from further connection to the mesh APs or root APs, you also set up a check mark. You also set up the backhaul of that root AP, 5 gigahertz or 2.4 gigahertz. So those are very important parameters that you also set up under this mesh tag. Again, as I keep indicating, details of all these parameters are in a mesh deployment guide. So this was a step how to configure. Shot was indicated, you choose one specific AD. Now that can be actually quite a time-consuming process. So in order to choose multiple APs, you can go to the wireless setup advanced tab, and you can see here kind of a flow chart of all the steps that we accomplished so far, creating different policy profiles in tags, in WLAN profile, etc. And the last tab here is tag APs. So if you go to this screen, advanced screen, you can choose multiple APs that joined our controller, and you can here map them with our policy tag, site tag, and RF tag. So again, this is kind of a screen to mass configure multiple APs with the profiles as indicated before. Another way to mass configure multiple APs, if you have many mesh APs in your design, is by going to tags and profiles, and under tag you can choose APs and then set up a filter. So in our case, we configuring mesh tag rule filter, and as you can see, we're setting up a rule name mesh tag rule with AP name regex AP-bash-asterisk. So basically, if you have hundreds of APs and all of their names in specific group start with AP mesh, they will be configured with the parameters and policies as indicated here. So you can choose this filter, make it active, and then apply these policy tags, site tags, and RF tags. So again, this is another way to configure multiple APs at the same time. So with that, it basically concludes the configuration steps of mesh network. And now, once everything is configured, we can go to next step and see how is everything configured, what's operational in our mesh network, what's our path, who are our neighbors, etc. So we can do it by simply go to the monitoring tab and look at the AP statistics. We can choose a specific AP, then we can go at the mesh tab, look at general settings, gives you different parameters about your mesh network, or you can go to neighbor settings or mesh path settings. So again, a lot of information is available under AP statistics monitoring tab. If we go to monitoring wireless mesh, there's additional parameters that you can see under AP and convergence. So if you look under APs, you see all these different important parameters when it comes to mesh settings. For example, you can see number of bridge APs. You can see how many wraps and how many maps you have totally in this from the total number of bridge APs. You can also see, for example, convergence. How is it set up and on what channels it operates? So all these are extremely important parameters in mesh configurations that you can go back and kind of monitor and see what's going on in your mesh network, and it can help you in troubleshooting your mesh network as well. So this basically concludes the quick configuration steps in configuring and deploying your mesh network on the Cisco Catalyst 9800 wireless controllers. Thank you.